Okay. Shall I say a prayer to start us off?
By all means.
Um, okay. Lord God, our glorious and Holy Father, we stop now to um, pause and reflect. One of the things that you ask of us is to examine ourselves. So hopefully this will be useful in doing that and allowing you into our lives in a more um, in a deeper way, to the places that we know that you can work and that you can transform us. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. Hi guys. A few more people have joined us. Since there's only a few of you, can I just hear a nice hello from folks, so I know I'm talking to people.
Hello.
I sound more good evening for you guys if you are in Australia. Got a Jed and a Alyssa and a Jess. Hello. You don't have to say anything. But... Cool. Okay, right. I'm going to share my slides with you. So yeah, we're going to talk about self-awareness, and I guess the first questions we maybe have to ask about that is why self-awareness? What is self-awareness? What am I talking about? I think there's three observations I'd like to make to start with. The first being, I think these are all biblical principles as well. That the only person we can really change in any meaningful and genuine way, and any way that we can trust, is ourselves. And so that's a first takeaway. Also, this is a priority I feel is set by Jesus. There are plenty of times when Jesus says, first do this, and a few of those are devoted to self-awareness. So he says to the Pharisees, first clean the inside of the cup, and first take the plank out of your own eye. Both instructions to kind of look inwardly, to consider your self first, in terms of how to develop and change yourself. But obviously, contrary to that, putting your brother first in terms of their needs. And also, finally, changing the heart and the mind of another person, I believe, is outside of our jurisdiction. When we look into the Bible, any transforming of hearts and minds is done by God, and the work of God, the hand of God. And I think Job is a good example of that. I'm just going to pop up a passage from Job. This is God's response to Job after his first speech. This is the second speech in Job, and he says, I will question you and you make it known to me. Will you even put me in the wrong? Will you condemn me that you may be right? And for context, Job has been trying to put his friends right for the last 38 chapters or so, and he's trying to show them where they're wrong and condemn them, and they've been trying to condemn him and tell him that he's wrong. And God says at the end, as after this whirlwind, okay, I'm speaking now. Will you condemn me? Have you an arm like God? Can you thunder with a mighty voice like his? Adorn yourself with majesty and dignity. Clothe yourself with glory and splendor. Pour out the overflowings of your anger and look on everyone who is proud and abase him. Look on everyone who is proud and bring him low, and tread him down, and tread down the wicked where they stand. Again, this is what Job's been trying to do. He's been trying to control and meter his friends. He's been trying to stop their pride in their thinking that they're right. And God says, hide them all in the dust together, bind their faces in the world below. Then I will acknowledge that to you, that your own right hand can save you. So I think the point of Job is that God is saying, you can't control other people, Job. If you can do that, if you can bring the proud low, then I'll acknowledge that your own right hand can save you and you don't need me. But essentially, Job can't do that. He battles with that all the way through the book of Job, and he can't do it. And so God is kind of saying, this is what you're trying to control, but you can't. Actually, you need to turn that inwardly. You need to think about how you can have some self-control. Another um, Bible phrase that we come across a lot. One of my favorite verses or passages in this is from Timothy 2. This is about what the Lord's servant must be. The Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but kind to everyone, able to teach, patiently enduring evil, correcting his opponents with gentleness. God may perhaps grant them repentance, leading to a knowledge of the truth. I think that's really important. So it says here that the person that grants repentance, it's not us, we can't do that, and that leads to a knowledge of the truth is God. God does that transformative work. We can try and correct people with gentleness, we can plant those seeds, but we have to do it with patience. We have to do it with an ability to teach without quarreling, being kind to everyone. It carries on. They may come to their senses and escape from the snare of the devil after being captured by him to do his will. So I think there's links back to Job as well, and that idea of what the devil is there. But that's probably another class. So yeah, first point from this is changing people's hearts and minds is God's domain. It's not for us to try and change other people. It's for us to look inwardly, to open up our hearts. And like David says in the Psalms, I think it's 139, search me, try me, and know any wicked way that's in me. So we need to let God into our hearts. We need to search our hearts, not other people's, which is a very challenging thing to do, I think. So here's what we're going to look at today. We're going to look at making the unconscious conscious. We're going to look at vulnerability, and we're going to look at some tools. These are modern tools from relationship counseling or psychology that are real key ways for me to help with being more self-aware. Let me. My notes are actually on my phone, so I should probably be watching that. Okay, so I'm gonna maybe. So the idea I think is to. Well, there's only 7 of you online. So any questions for that point? Am I making sense? Of people have any questions so far? I want to kind of maybe engage in discussion every 20 minutes or so during this talk, rather than at the end. Yeah, or if you want to write anything in the chat, anything that kind of crops up, find interesting, then do that as well. Okay, right. So I've got this phrase here, making the unconscious conscious, and that sounds really, what does that mean? So yeah, we all have an unconscious element to us, our unconscious biases, our unconscious reasons for doing things that we're not always aware of. And when we make those things, when we become aware of those things and make them conscious, they're much easier to look at and analyze. We often do this in hindsight. Maybe you look back on your life from like 2-3 years ago, you can look at situations and maybe they make you cringe and you go, oh, actually with hindsight, I'm a bit more aware now of maybe that wasn't the right thing to say, or that was really embarrassing, or, or maybe you did a really good thing. You're like, actually, yeah, I'm really, really pleased that I did that. And you can look back, but in the moment, you probably weren't aware as much. And obviously time and that span of time can help you become more conscious of things. But if we can do that with a bit more immediacy, that would be really useful for us. So we know how to be the most Christ-like in a moment. I imagine, Jesus was particularly aware during his mission of the heart of man and of his heart. And he was quick to jump to prayer, to acknowledge when it was his human desire taking over and asking God's will to be done in situations. So what's going on here? I think that this is a good illustration of this. So if I say that I am a Christadelphian, or I am a Arsenal supporter, or I am British, then I'm making myself the subject of something. I am that. That's the subject. But what self-awareness does, it makes those things that I believe that I am into more of an object. And if we can kind of step away from what we think we are, we can have a better idea of what it is that we are claiming to be and our identity. So rather than that, we can say, I have beliefs that are in line with Christadelphians. I have a strong support for my football team, my country. That means that then if somebody maybe insults, so here's an example with being British, being English. If I can say, I am British and it's the best country in the world. So if someone insults the UK, then I could take that very personally as an attack on me because I am that thing. However, and that can lead to all sorts of tensions, and it does lead to all sorts of tensions with nationalism and things being very popular at the moment in the world. If we can separate those things and say, actually, I have strong feelings about the country I grew up in and was born in, you can see how that leads to possibly a better way of dealing with who we are and beliefs we have and our ideas, saying I have those things. Then people are attacking something that's separate from us, and we can maybe navigate that a little bit better. We won't be hiding behind it. Listen, my wife Naomi is here as well. She's going to be chipping in with a few bits and bobs as well. Is that reminders? So yeah, we because we have all these things that we maybe identify with, that we put in front of us as maybe shields. We kind of hide behind some of these things, and actually to move them to one side and say, actually, I can see myself as separate from that, and I can analyze this thing as an object rather than as a part of me. That's a really good practice, but it does leave you maybe feeling quite vulnerable when you take away those ideas, because when you separate yourself from your ideas, you might ask the question, what's left? Who am I if I'm not those things? Who am I before God? Who am I before other people? And our identity is sometimes a protective thing that we use. And so self-awareness in this context is actually the act of becoming a bit more vulnerable and showing maybe our true selves, because, you know, maybe I have this identity of Christadelphian, and there's some bits of me that don't quite fit into that identity, and those bits of me I will try and tuck them in. I'll try and get them behind the identity sort of thing, but actually some parts just stick out like a sore thumb. Some parts I'm hiding from, and actually it's much better if I put that identity to one side and say, yeah, I identify with that and I believe in lots of those things, but me as a whole person maybe has some more to me than that. And I don't know if anybody is aware of the work of Brené Brown. She's becoming increasingly popular with her books and podcasts and things. I really enjoy her work. She talks about vulnerability. And so she says that we actually cultivate love when we allow our most vulnerable and powerful selves to be seen and known. So when we allow our most vulnerable and powerful selves to be seen and known. So all those things that I'm trying to kind of hide and tuck in and fit into my actual identity that I'm trying to portray out into the world, if I actually allow that to be seen and known, that can cultivate real love. And that's kind of what happens when you meet someone you love, is that you say, actually, I'm going to show to this person more of the warts and all parts of me, and hopefully they'll still love me after that, and your love grows stronger for doing that. It carries on, when we honor the spiritual connection that grows from that offering with trust, respect, kindness, and affection. That's when love really grows. So when someone offers up their true selves, you know, they've done some self-reflection and they've gone, actually, you know, this part of me doesn't fit into this identity. This part of me is something different. I'm going to maybe, you know, this requires a lot of trust actually with people, and it can, but I think it often garners a lot of respect and kindness. However, if we do find ourselves in an environment where that is not respected and actually is dealt with in a different way, then that can be really damaging, and it can cause us to hide even more behind these identities. So yeah, if we find that actually shame, blame, disrespect, betrayal, and also like the withholding of affection because of anything that you're displaying, is really damaging. And yeah, love can only survive these if they're acknowledged. If we say, actually, I saw that you put yourself out there and I didn't respect it. You need to acknowledge those things to help that. I wonder if I could again just check up on everybody who's listening. I've only got one little square in my corner while I'm doing this. I'm just going to stay up a little bit. Yeah, can anyone think of any maybe vulnerable examples of vulnerability in the Bible? Characters that either tried to hide behind something and it didn't work out for them, or people that really opened up and said, actually, here's who I really am, and it kind of led to God's work being done. So chuck that out there, see if there's any responses.
Hey, Tom.
Hello.
I love these thoughts on Brene Brown and the idea of vulnerability. I've been wishing in the States here, especially with the protests and stuff going on, that in our community, people would just say, like, this is a bad week in precedent of every comment I'm about to make. Kind of like, it's like, yeah, this isn't a scriptural example, but like we've had a lot of terrible dialogue online, specifically in our North American community. And it's like, if we all would just say, hey, this doesn't feel great, what's happening right now, I think it would change everything, every comment after that, like knowing that we're both in pain.
Yeah. One thing I really, go on.
I was saying, I'm actually very curious, did you have a scriptural example in mind when you asked the question?
Well, there's two in the chat. There's Adam and Eve hiding in the garden, and absolutely that is one of them. That vulnerability of, and I think that's one of the reasons that they hide. They have to find a covering for themselves. They feel vulnerable. They feel ashamed of what they've done, and they're trying to fit themselves back in some way, and by making an inadequate covering. There's also Ruth in the chat as well, Melissa, and turning to Naomi and saying, you know what, I'm gonna be really vulnerable with you. Your God is my God. I'm gonna go where you go. Is a really powerful one as well. And just say, yeah, my heritage, my things, like they're all things I don't fit with. I'm gonna join along with you. We've got Elijah in the cave. Think about that one. Yeah, so Elijah's like, I can't cope anymore. I can't do this. And interestingly, God is, I'm not sure how compassionate God is towards Elijah in that situation. That's one to think about. I was definitely thinking about Peter, who tries to put on a show of bravado and strength, and he hides behind that, when in reality he's clearly in too deep, and that feeling of vulnerability he gets when Christ looks at him after the cock crows 3 times. That's an exercise in exposing Peter's vulnerability, I think, and out of that vulnerability and that look Jesus gives, it's always like different interpretations of what that look is, but that look, you could interpret that in many different ways. I like to think it's one of like compassion on Peter in that vulnerable state that he's in. But going back to your comments, Levi, on the tensions in America, and it being really hard to navigate for I don't know the race of everybody listening, but as a white person, thinking, yeah, this is quite hard to navigate, and having the self-awareness to realize that that's exactly how most black men and women feel during their everyday lives in a dominant white culture and the vulnerabilities that they feel is a really powerful one to reflect on. And go, actually, this is me having a small moment of not quite sure what to say, what to do, and being open about that is really important. Yeah.
Could I just say as well in response to Levi's comment, I think the essence of the Brené Brown thing is that if you can, I think she gives the example of, in a difficult situation, you often resort to, well, what would my tribe say about it? What in terms of my political or religious or social groups, what would they say about it? And then I'll just stick to that and I'll just shout it even louder. Whereas if you separate yourself from being having a particular, religious or cultural or political background, you can really examine and look at yourself, think, actually, what do I think about this? And this is just really horrible, and this is very difficult. And you can be more honest and aware of what you feel, and even you don't have to have a concrete idea as well, because I think that often comes into, especially Christadelphian debate, where you've got the truth with a capital T. There's got to just be a solid answer at the end of it, and depending on which tribe of Christadelphia you belong to, there is there's a party line. Whereas if you step out of that and think, I am not that person, that doesn't define me, I'm just a person who is sort of part of that tribe. So if you step back, you can think, actually, what do I think about it? And maybe I don't have an answer, and maybe I just do feel a bit uncomfortable or unsure at the moment.
Yeah, maybe we have to listen, and we'll come on to that as well.
And also, I've got a Bible character. I feel like I'm at Sunday school. I've got a Bible character. It'd be Nicodemus, because he's really struggling with oh no, I'm a Pharisee. Like, it's not just this is my social tribe, it's like this is my entire livelihood and reputation. But he's so clearly starting to think, no, I think we're wrong. And he is slowly becoming more and more vulnerable as he comes to visit Jesus at night and then becomes more public about his beliefs.
Because he holds a lot of power, so being vulnerable and having power is a challenging one. Can you go to that? Okay, so vulnerability leads to. I've got a chat box over my screen. Vulnerability leads to when we can be vulnerable and find that people will trust us in that vulnerability and respect that, we can actually have a greater sense of belonging. This is another one of Brené Brown's thoughts. It's an innate human desire to be a part of something larger than us. Because this yearning is so primal, we often try to acquire it by fitting in and seeking approval, which are not only hollow substitutes for belonging, but often barriers to it. True belonging only happens when we present our authentic and imperfect selves to the world. Our sense of belonging can never be greater than our level of self-acceptance. And so when we try and change other people, we're often trying to get them to fit into what we think and how we feel we should belong. But if we can respect each other for who we are and all those bits that don't quite fit in, then we get just a wider sense of belonging that we can enjoy and rejoice in. Really. So we're going to move on to look at these tools that I was saying, some frameworks. These are like maps. They're like world maps. So don't think of these things as maps that help us get from my house to the corner store. Think of them as maps that kind of give us a broad overview of how something works and how we can apply them. And we're going to start with one which is called transactional analysis. Get my notes back up. So let me just read this. Vulnerability is a gold mine of love. Don't be scared to go there, because that's where the growth is. We can really grow when we become self-aware and we find people who accept us for all that warts and all sort of stuff. So this is a way to hopefully be more aware of that in our lives. It's called transactional analysis. Don't put off by the technical name. It's from kind of marriage counselling or couples counselling, which I think is appropriate for us as Christadelphians. We all want a future together. We're all planning that future together, and we all love each other in the same way. So to use some of these techniques in our ecclesias is really useful. And once I learnt this method, I saw it in almost all conversations I was having. This looks at how we often treat people like either like children or like parents, and not as the adults that we should be treating them as. And once you see this, we explain it, hopefully you'll see it in conversations as well. And so the main principle of it is that when we talk to each other, we channel one of three states we've learnt through our life experience. So we'll model things from our lives, from parents or people in authority, or from our experience as children, but ideally we want to be in the adult state. Now I need to share my screen with the sound on. I've got a few little videos. It's very short. There's a really good video on this online. This is just some parts of
it. TA suggests we shift between three distinct ego states. Parent. This is a state in which you think, feel and behave in ways based on how your parents and other authority figures acted. Adult. Here you think, feel and behave in response to the here and now. You're able to draw on your full life experience, and generally you're geared to a realistic, objective appraisal of your experiences. Child. In this state you think, feel and behave just like you did in your childhood. We move between the ego states all the time.
So yeah, I find we can often slip into parent or child quite quickly in reaction to what people do or say. And also in our own comments, we can push other people into their parent and child states too. So you find this in loads of conversations. I might appeal to Naomi and go, "Nay, I can't do this. Can you help me with it?" And I'm going into quite a kind of whingy child state there, and I'm trying to elicit in Naomi a parent that will come and help me because I'm a needy child. Or we might snap at somebody and say, "How dare you speak to me like that?" And we're becoming parental, and we're trying to push them into a state of child so that they become complicit to the power that I'm exerting. And often when we're asking to do things, when we're trying to discuss things, when we're going through many of our interactions in life, we're often slipped into child or parent. And I think that's something that we really need to be aware of, because that they're not the healthiest ways of communicating. But you might have heard these interactions play out. You might have heard your parents speaking in this way, your friends talk to each other in this kind of a way. Definitely happens online. People will be like rebellious kids online. They'll really goad people, or they'll talk down to people, and potentially at church as well. And I believe that these are all, especially the parental one, that's a place of pride that you talk from when you talk down to somebody like that. And so I'm going to put up a slide next. I want you to kind of give you a couple of seconds to gauge your reaction to the picture that I'm going to put up and see how it makes you feel. Okay, so this might be, oh yeah, this reminds me of a really lovely brother that I know who was really kind and really listened lots, and he was really wise, and that was really nice. And so you know, it might be a good feeling that you get, or it might be one that's like, oh yeah, no, this reminds me of being a bit belittled from the front of the meeting and being talked down to, and it's really strict formal things. I'll just read my notes from the previous slide. Yeah. So when someone talks from the platform, it's certainly a place that you can parent from, and you can elicit a response from the group that you're speaking to. It could be that the person at the front says something like, brothers and sisters, as Christadelphians, we don't vote. Voting is not something that we take part in, and I really hope that you didn't vote in the last election that went past. And that might elicit in you a complicit child that is like, oh, I didn't do that, I was very good, I'm a good little boy. Or it might elicit in you a rebellious child, like, you know what, well, you know, maybe I didn't think about it that much, actually. Who are you to say that I shouldn't do things? Or it could elicit in you a parent as well, and go, yes, that's a very bad thing to do, and I hope no one else did it as well, and I'm going to parent other people about this when I speak to them. So yeah, we can provoke different reactions in the way that we speak to each other, and often parent elicits either a complicit or a rebellious child. And I'd really ask you to think about this and try and be aware of when this happens to you in your conversations and when you slip into those things. Here's an interaction that this video puts forward that's an interesting one, because it can go like this.
But not all transactions are complementary. Let's go back to Bill and Jackie.
You're useless. Don't you dare talk to me that way.
Here we have an initial parent statement aimed at Jackie's child. But here, Jackie responds by moving to her parent, feeling and expressing outrage. This is called a crossed interaction, reflecting the crossed arrows. Unlike complementary transactions, which are seen as stable and can go on indefinitely, crossed transactions are highly unstable, and one of two things tends to happen. Either the transaction will stop, or there'll be a shift of ego state in one of the parties to create a new, stable, complementary transaction, like this.
You're useless. Don't you dare talk to me that way. You've missed the meeting. I don't care what I've done. You don't talk to people like that. But now you can apologise. I'm waiting.
I just meant that...
I said I'm waiting.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I don't think you mean it. Right, that's it. I'm reporting you for harassment.
Look, I am. I'm really sorry.
So what started out as Bill trying to put Jackie in a child state ended up with Bill firmly in the child state and Jackie as parent. Now that the transaction shifted, it can stay like that, with Bill perpetually submitting to Jackie. It's not necessarily a comfortable state of affairs, particularly for Bill, but it can be psychologically stable.
Okay, so yeah, I think that's really interesting, and that's probably something that we can maybe see when we go into debates and discussions, and when they become heated, it's probably because people are just trying to parent each other, and you get that cross transaction, and it becomes really there's a lot of friction, a lot of tension. I think that's what's going on in the book of Job. It's like 38 chapters of just tension of groups trying to parent each other, and I really love the book of Job. I really recommend John Popel's work on it, but it really shows how this transaction happens. No one becomes a complicit child. Everyone gets riled up, and the story kind of builds and builds and builds until God has to kind of actually come and speak in the whirlwinds to put everybody in their place, to make the mountains low and the valleys high. Is kind of what God does. He levels that playing field. So behind these interactions, then, I believe it is a lot of vulnerability that's being masked. We're trying to hold up our identity. We're trying to say, this is who I am and this is what we believe. And so I'm going to put that in front of my vulnerability and protect myself from things. And I'm going to parent you, and I'm going to make you in line so that you can be a part of, fit into that as well. And so one way of looking at this is through something that transactional analysis calls the why don't you yes but game. And this is another interaction that shows how vulnerability is at the heart of all of these things, or trying to protect our vulnerability is behind all these things. So play this video.
Here's a scenario. Person A says they have some problem. Person B starts suggesting solutions. One by one, person A rejects every single one of them, giving a reason why each solution wouldn't work. B eventually runs out of ideas.
Okay, so yeah.
Here's a scenario.
Essentially, A has a vulnerability. I can't do this essay, is the example. and they're asking for help. But often, what it does is it exposes some sort of attachment need that they have, this vulnerability that they have. It becomes really hard to ask for what we really need. We're not practiced at it, and we're not even totally aware of what we want. And so this is a classic scenario where person A is probably a bit maybe working on their essay. They've gotten a bit bored, and they hit a dead spot. So they go and find maybe their housemate or their friend, and they say, "I can't do it," and they're appealing to the parent of the other person. But the other person provides all these solutions, and they're just not listened to by person A. And it's because person A is actually trying to get at an underlying need that they have, and that underlying need is just to be listened to. We always just want to be listened to in most cases. And when we provide solutions, we become the person offering, asking for them to listen to us and listen to our solutions. But actually, they've come to us with underlying need of wanting to be listened to. And that's often behind these interactions, is just a need to be listened to. This comes from called emotional attachment theory. It understands that we are emotionally hungry people, and we reach out for connections to satisfy that hunger. But often we reach out in a way that tries to hide our vulnerabilities. So person A wants to be listened to. They want to take a break from their essay. They want to have some sort of emotional interaction with somebody. And so they hide that behind this kind of faux question about wanting some help, when it clearly they didn't actually want any help in the first place. They just wanted someone to talk to. And if you can hear that and be aware of that, then you can really meet people's needs in a more satisfying way. You can actually go, well, you know what, I'm not going to provide this person with just a bunch of solutions. I'm going to listen to them and hear out what they want to say. This emotional attachment thing is clearly the reason why we're always checking our phones for likes and comments. We always want that kind of reassurance, affirmation, and us checking our phones, it's always a poor substitute for being really listened to and understood. Dr. Sue Johnson, who works in this field, says, if I appeal to you for emotional connection, like person A did, and if you respond intellectually to the problem rather than directly to me on an attachment level, I will actually experience that as no response. Because I want you to listen to me. If you provide me just solutions, then I won't actually think of that as a response to an underlying need. So yeah, listen for the appeal to emotional connection, especially if you're a figure of authority. The person wants to be listened to first. If you start with solutions, their need to be listened to gets relegated and they become the listener. You might think in an ecclesial life, we don't want these emotions to get in the way of maybe really important discussions on head coverings or sisters speaking or sexuality or things like that. But I'd suggest that that we all have emotions that are there by default, and we need to acknowledge them and be aware of them throughout these discussions, and acknowledge them first, be honest about them, and say, what's really good to do at the start of these discussions is have a checking in round where you go around the group and you say, okay, what are you bringing to this discussion? Have you had a really hard week at work and actually you're thinking more about work than you are about this discussion? Is this something that's actually you're really struggling with? Do you need to kind of say that first and make that known before we start this, and put all the emotions on the table so people can kind of tread more delicately in things. An example might be that sisters feel that it's, a sister comes up and says, I feel it's unfair that sisters can't speak. And maybe the response to that is, well, there's lots of things sisters can do. There's solutions are then provided. Well, there's always Sunday school. There's always writing articles to the magazine. There's always these other things you can do. Here's a bunch of solutions. When actually you maybe need to sit down with that person and listen to why they maybe feel it's unfair, and hear that emotional story first. What connection do they have to it? Why are they bringing this up rather than jumping to solutions? Here's the last little bit of the video, and then we'll have maybe a little bit more discussion and see if this has resonated with some people.
TA therapy's goal is often to strengthen the adult state. If you're interested in doing that, one starting point is to look at what events and people trigger your parent and child states. Do you assign responsibility equally? Do you have to be in control? Do you feel forced into taking control? Do you have a hard time making decisions and try to get others to make them for you? Do you feel fundamentally you're not as good as others? And what might these things bring out in other people, perhaps in reaction to you?
So there's some questions there. Those are things that will trigger your parent and child states. Yeah, do you have to feel like, oh, I need to take control of this situation? This discussion I need to predict it, what's going to happen, and control it. Or do you feel that other people go, oh, you know, Levi, how do we deal with this situation? And you know, they come as a child and they go, we need you to take control of this situation. It's in those situations that you maybe need to step back and say, actually, we need to be more aware of what's going on here and apply the adult method, which I'll go into next. I think we'll maybe have a little bit of discussion. So that's a recap on transactional analysis. Try and be aware of what you're channeling. Think about what emotional attachment the person needs first before offering solutions or advice. And this idea of, listening first. So yeah, I'm going to open it back up again to the participants. Check anything in the chat, or if you have any comments that can spark a bit of discussion, then go for it. Did that make sense? Essentially, is the first thing. Do people recognise that scenario, those scenarios?
I can get the scenario. I suppose one thing I'd wonder is what happens if aren't that cognizant that need. I mean,
I didn't quite catch that. You're breaking up a little bit there.
Sorry. Hey, so what if you have trouble actually recognizing the difference? So I'm ASD, for example, so I'm more likely to miss some of those social cues.
Yes. Yeah. This with non-neurotypical people, this is a minefield, and that's why social interaction is so hard. And hopefully, providing some structure around these things can provide a little bit of help. It takes a lot of practice, but certainly, I've worked with autistic adults as part of my job, and I find one of the first things you need to do is have that self-awareness to bring that to the conversation first and say, by the way, I'm not neurotypical. These things don't work this way for me. And hopefully, as a society, we're becoming more and more aware of the need to recognise that with people that are not neurotypical, and allow for them to make the mistakes that they're going to make, and you'll probably find people maybe jump down your throat and parent you a lot quicker than they do other people, because you maybe step over those boundaries without realizing. So yeah, that's a particular challenge for people with ASD or other who aren't neurotypical. I feel like there should be more advice I could give at this point.
Okay.
But I guess any kind of practical tool that you give, the idea is just at whatever level you are with your ability to step back and look at a social situation, hopefully it can just give you an extra tool to strengthen that, so from whatever starting point you're at. For everyone, it's useful just to have a more concrete idea and labels and certain concepts.
And use it as that bigger map that I was saying. This is not a detailed route through every single conversation that you're going to ever have, but just to have it as something that you can be aware of. And I'd suggest most people aren't aware of this. I wasn't aware of this interaction thing until like 6 months ago, when I read about it. And then once I saw it, I was like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. This person is always trying to parent, and actually, well, the next slide I have is kind of a solution to that. But I mean, is it something that you can recognize though, Daniel? Do you see this in hindsight in conversations that go on?
Sometimes, but not always.
Does anyone else have any comments at this point?
Hey, Tom. I definitely noticed. Oh well, I was shown this construct when I was attending counseling about at this time last year, maybe. Just how much I basically desired to be the child in all interactions, and that led me to being a people pleaser. And I think it like the kind of the scriptural way to take this construct that you're presenting is just an actual humility. I mean, if we are all God's children, and we should be treating each other all as adults, or the children to children construct, which is not really presented, which has to come from a place of actual humility, and nobody ever avoiding that parent to child relationship.
Absolutely.
You showed the picture of the brother at the podium. It's like, well, that picture only works spiritually well for everybody if they actually know the brother, right? If they don't really know the brother in the most deepest sense, that if they don't consider him consider him to the level of their real brother, then it's not effective.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, think about the people that you don't do the parent or child thing with. They're probably the people that you trust and know the best. They're going to be the people that you really respect and will respect you, and so you don't feel like you have to go into those positions of protective parent and protecting your vulnerability in that way.
It strikes me when you think about in a spiritual kind of teaching role, taking on that parent, which is very much a very kind of traditional, church way of delivering a sermon, someone's literally standing up higher than you at the pulpit or at the lectern. That it's not very conducive to genuine faith, because if that person is taking on the parent role and the people in the congregation or the church are take on a child role, according to transaction analysis, that either brings out a complicit child in which you're agreeing kind of out of fear and wanting to please that person, which isn't necessarily a genuine, well, what do I think about this faith, and do I believe this because of me or just because I want to please people and that's what people in authority have said. Or it brings out a rebellious child. So that thing of like, oh, well, maybe I will go and do that then, or don't tell me what to do. Yes, and neither of those things are very conducive to a kind of genuine, authentic faith, at least in the way I kind of see it and experience it. That it needs to be a lot more, kind of thinking about the way that we do teaching, and especially the way we revere people, maybe put people on a pedestal. That's not particularly healthy.
Oh, Alethea Jim. Bernie's just joined us. Hello, Alethea. Okay, so let's go in here then. This is how you adult. I'll get rid of that. So this is the listening technique, and it's been really useful for me in becoming more self-aware, and it works in with two people, but hopefully it can work in a group as well. I'll just go through it and then we'll talk about it. So this is where partner one maybe has a concern, and you say, okay, let's do the listening technique here, and partner one says how they're feeling. Partner two is then invited to repeat back what partner one has said, which already is a totally different way of communicating than we're used to. Normally, a person says something and then you want to react to that, and you want to say what you think about that, and you want to put your opinion across. But this technique, if you can instigate it and hold to it properly, means that partner 2 actually just repeats back what the first person has said. And that is healthy on so many levels, because first of all, it means that you are literally verbalizing the other person's opinion. It helps you process it. It helps you empathize with it. You're putting a mirror back to that person and saying, this is how I've heard what you've said. And that can be really useful, because that person might be like, you might repeat back to that person an opinion that they don't feel like they put forward in the first place. So it gives them a chance to clarify themselves, and also to hear how it is that they are sounding. So you can go through that process. They can say how they're feeling. You can repeat it back until you clarify exactly the feeling. You can land on the feeling that they have. And it's also useful so that you can do this technique, and partner 1 can say something just to begin grappling with that feeling. They can say, I'm feeling like this, and then you repeat that back and go, no, it's not quite that. And so they get a chance to kind of hone it in. It doesn't become that the first thing that they say is then set in stone and say, you said this is what you feel, I can't believe it. It's actually a clarification process where you can get to the heart of what that person means. Very often the first thing that comes out of our mouth when we're trying to elaborate on how we feel is not really what we mean. It's like the first steps to getting to where we're feeling. So this is a really good process to clarify that, and you can imagine that in maybe as an opposed to a heated debate or an argument that could spark off. That clarity is really important. And then you ask, you try and drill down a bit with point 4 there. You ask, what's concerning you most about what you've just told me? So then you can really focus on the core part of that issue, and that gets repeated back again. It can be clarified. Then partner 2 asks, is there anything that you, me, or we could do about it? You kind of put the onus of the resolution, the action points, back to the person who has the concern and say, what is the solution? In an ideal world, what would the solution be? Can we think about that? So again, it doesn't do that thing of it. This doesn't appeal to them as a child and say, you don't jump down their throat as a parent immediately. It also doesn't let them become a child by saying, oh, this is the problem. I want you to deal with it. You ask them, okay, how can you deal with this? You put the onus back on them and allow them to reflect on that. And then you just kind of make sure that is repeated back to them, and you ask them if there's anything else you would like to say. Maybe doing this process actually brings up the deeper emotional response of you know what, I just want to be listened to. Might be the final thing that comes out. I just want to be listened to, and I want to be heard. And so this listening technique allows for that, and you'll probably find that they feel a lot better after you've done this, and maybe 80% of the problem actually dissipates through listening in this kind of a way. What was I going to say? Yeah. So hopefully that makes sense. I'm aware that the time is 8:57. We've had a little bit of discussion in between these things. I have another section on something called, think about moral taste buds and things. But I'm also have to stop and open up for some kind of just general chit chat and discussion and things. Does that listening technique make sense to people? It's something, again, these things are all the unnatural ways of having conversations that they really require a paradigm shift for you to think in a different way, to stop your immediate reaction to say what you think, and to put that other person's concerns and to bring them out at the forefront of the conversation, so that you're trusting them. This is because if you're jumping on someone's opinion very quickly and trying to shut them down, you're not trusting them at all. You're trying to clamp it. If you let that thing out of the box a little bit, you might actually see that it wasn't the horrible idea you thought it was. It wasn't the opinion that was so disturbing you thought it was. It was actually just needed some clarification. It just needed some balancing, and then you could kind of reflect on that. And then hopefully, if you model this to people, then you can ask for it in return and say, actually, well, I have a concern about this as well. Would you mind doing the listening technique with me in response? So yeah, just Daniel, just give me some pointers in terms of time, and if anyone else wants to chip in with any comments or things in the chat, I'm going to give you a chance, and we'll either stop there or I can carry on.
Probably up to the rest of the group, and we've got nothing else on after this tonight.
What time is it for you guys? Is it like 6, 7 o'clock?
Go to
6
dinner,
o'clock.
So Tom, I think before this, I said to you, what do you want people to take away as a message? And you said you'd want people to take away the idea that it's a biblical concept that you shouldn't try and change other people, but you should change yourself first. At least it's the priority to change yourself and change your thinking. So this listening technique is almost the antidote, it's the complete opposite to debate, where you want to kind of force your ideas on someone else, get them to understand how you think, get them to change their mind. The idea is just to listen and find out what the other person thinks. It's for you to learn about what they think, and completely put out of your head, oh, but I need to get across them what I think and I need to convince them. It's just purely about listening, and in doing so, because that's so opposite to the way we normally talk about things, it really opens things up, and it's very revealing. And also, you have to be very vulnerable to do it. You have to step out of your place of like, right, I know exactly what I'm going to say. I know what my points are. Yeah.
And you're letting go of the reins of trying to hold down the maybe you have an idea of the group that you're in and what that group looks like and how everyone has to kind of fit into that group. And as soon as someone brings up well, maybe what about sisters speaking, or what about things about sexuality, you know, they really don't fit into this idea of the group I have to rein that down, I have to shut that down. But actually having some more trust and some more vulnerability around that means actually letting go of the borders of that thing and saying, actually, okay, let's listen to why you feel that's an important topic, and maybe I can you know, it engenders more of a relationship with that person to understand who they are, where they come from. And I think that's really important. Like Levi was saying, you really need to know people as individuals through this process. So I think we were given 30 minutes for discussion. We've had some discussion through. So I'm gonna maybe rattle through. Well, yeah, okay. I'll see if anyone else wants to say anything. Pause. Okay, I'm going to take that as a carry on. Right. So all these layers all these conversations that we have are fairly multi-layered. We've just explored how actually there's quite a key emotional element to these discussions that we need to listen to first, and we can do that through the listening technique. The listening technique can also highlight for us what the moral position is that someone is coming from when they're having some of these discussions. This uses something called Moral Matrix by Jonathan Haidt, and this is generally about what is called moral taste buds. So we all have a palette of morality that means that when we come across certain things, we'll be like, yeah, that really resonates with me. I like that, more of that, please. Or we can be like, oh no, that's not quite sure I like that. Makes maybe a little bit disgusted actually at that opinion. And that's because of our moral taste buds. It's put forward that we have 6 moral taste buds by Jonathan Haidt and the people that he works with. And they are the 6 you can see on the screen: care, liberty, fairness, loyalty, authority, and sanctity. We're just going to quickly jump through these. So care is, you know, you see someone falling over and you feel it. Oh, you're like, that was, you know, and you, if you're in the position to, you go and you help them up, and you want that to happen. You want to show that sympathy towards individuals who are in harm, and we're driven to care for them. Liberty and oppression. So if we see somebody being, you know, so having their liberty taken away from them, you see someone being bullied or oppressed, our instinct is for actually, no, we want that person to have their freedom. We want that person to exercise their own autonomy, and we don't want other people to interfere with that too much or at all. Fairness, we want the group that we're in to put in the fair share. We probably won't work with somebody a second time if they've cheated us, if they've you know, slacked off and not done the work, or they've taken from the group in an unfair way. This is the law of reciprocity, and we have that. And by the way, these are all suggested as innate things. They're kind of instinctive. They're not things that we actually consciously think. They're actually unconscious things. So this is one of those things that is unconscious that we want to try and make conscious. We have a sense of loyalty. Very much you see this within at a basic level within sporting events. You have a loyalty to a team, and you feel very betrayed when people break that loyalty. When a group is centered around a common cause, it can accomplish a lot more than a group which is less uniform. We have a desire for social order. We have a desire for some people who are merited to make a decision, to make that decision on our behalf. So if I suddenly have a pain in my appendix, I want to find someone who has the authority and the certificate that says, I can remove your appendix, I'm a doctor, and you don't have to learn any of these things. We want that. We want somebody who can deal with that. You know, people who are good at accounting, we want them to deal with that, and for that to be, to have the authority on that. And when people subvert that, then we don't like it. And then this is more of a primal one, the sanctity one. It's our instinct to keep certain things pure and sacred. You know, hundreds of years ago, these would have been items, they would have been objects that were sacred. Now it's more institutions or ways of doing things that become sacred. In the UK, the NHS is something you don't touch. If you're, you know, the National Health Service, we're very proud of it. It's sacred to us. Don't like you touching it. So what Jonathan Haidt found in his studies was that in his sampling of people in America, in terms of a set of questions that explored these taste buds, he found that if you identified as liberal, then you were going to have more of a strong connection to care, to liberty, and to fairness. Whereas if you were conservative, you were going to balance those care, liberty, fairness taste buds with loyalty, authority, and sanctity. Yet, if you're of a liberal mindset, you really don't have much loyalty. You don't have much respect for authority. You don't have much respect for sanctity. And this is really interesting in terms of looking at Christadelphia. But if you take an example from the world, in the UK, the idea of immigration, as I'm sure is all over the place, is really split in terms of the liberal view and the conservative view. And I'm using liberal and conservative here as labels on a spectrum. We want to be careful not to label people as liberal or conservative, but understand that their ideas might come from a foundation or a place of conservatism and liberalism. So yeah, with immigration in the UK, you might have newspapers that are saying, you know, putting pictures up of people in need and saying, yeah, look, these people need to be cared for. They're fleeing from war. They need to be treated with and their liberties given to them. Whereas more conservative newspapers will be like, but are they going to be loyal to the UK's laws? Are they going to respect the authority of the government? you know, the quick one is they're going to bring in Sharia law, and it's going to cause chaos, and everything's going to fall apart. And they're not going to hold sacred things that people in England hold sacred. And so they maybe balance those things with those ideas. So you get a real split in these ideas. Let me get my notes. So what you find is that the most sacred value for, if you come from a liberal mindset, is that you want care for the oppressed individual. And it's about individuals. It's about the individual's needs. And if one person is suffering, you know, you leave the 99 and you go and you find that one person and care for them. The conservative view is more that you want to preserve the institutions and traditions that sustain the community. It's more about the group. It's like saying, actually, you know, we need this group to survive. We need this group to move forward in the world. We can do more as a group. So we need to protect the group and preserve its institutions and traditions so that we can be more effective. You know, if we're all just individuals, then we can't really come together cohesively and do anything powerful in the world or of any use. So here's maybe an example that we might come across. Galatians 6 verse 10 says, "So then, as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone." So that really applies to the liberal person. Yeah, everyone. Let's go and find everyone, care for everyone's individual needs. But then we've got, and especially to those part of the household of faith. So then it balances it, and the conservative will go, actually, you know, household of faith first, and then the rest of the world. And here's an example of how this can really be useful to understand this in a conversation. I've used the conversation about sexuality, which is a hot topic. If someone comes into, you know, a discussion and says, "I'm really concerned about how we treat the homosexual community. I don't think we treat them fairly. I don't think we're caring for them at all." What we need to do is we need to listen for the taste buds, these moral foundations that person is pointing towards, and we need to meet them there. We need to listen to that, like I was saying, using the listening technique. We need to come at them and say, repeat back to them their concern about care, about the fairness, about the liberty issues that they have, and address those. Because if we do the opposite and we jump into that conversation and say, well, you know what, the Bible says this, and for however many years we've been doing it this way, and actually this is very sacred to us, then we have a conversation that basically doesn't meet a need. It completely doesn't even overlap. It misses. There's two conversations going on essentially. One is about care, fairness, and liberty. The other is one about authority, loyalty, and sanctity. And so they completely miss each other in terms of the conversation. Two conversations are now happening. We're not listening to each other. And so if someone with a strong care, fairness, and liberty foundation hears this response that appeals to authority, loyalty, and sanctity, they won't hear the points that they're making. They'll hear, oh, well, you just want harm for these people, you're cheating them, and you're oppressing them. Okay? That's what the person who brings up that issue will hear when you respond with authority, loyalty, and sanctity. And then on that person saying, well, you clearly don't care for these people, you're oppressing them, they'll hear subjugation, betrayal, and degradation from that person. Because you haven't engaged with the biblical text, because you haven't engaged with the loyalty of the group, they'll think that you are subjugating the authority of their interpretation of scripture. They'll think that you're betraying the group and you're degrading the sanctity of the group. So if we become more aware of our moral foundations and also the foundations of other people when we're listening to them, we can respond to them at those points and listen to them. And then maybe later on, bring in the other foundations to provide a point. So hopefully looking at transactional analysis, the idea of the parent and child thing, and the moral foundations theory just gives us two really concrete examples of what to listen for when we're in these conversations, what to respond to, rather than providing the opposite and becoming a child or parenting someone or responding with authority, loyalty, and sanctity to a care, fairness, liberty problem. We can do the listening technique essentially, and that's how you respond as an adult. That's how you respond with concern for that person's moral foundations, and that person will feel far more listened to and far more able to then accept and listen to you and maybe trust you and get to know you, become your friend, develop a relationship with you because they feel that they've been listened to. Maybe it would be useful to do an example of the opposite way round here. So if someone comes with an authority, loyalty, sanctity issue, maybe they come with a Bible verse and they say, you know what, I'm really concerned that Paul says this about head coverings, but I see that actually, you or some sisters are not wearing head coverings. So they're coming with an authority, loyalty, sanctity concern. It's not for you to respond and say anything about how you feel it might be oppressing people or cheating people or harming people. It's for you to listen to that person's concern and respond back to them and maybe explore their concern around their understanding of those passages. And then after you've done that, say, but also there is this whole other part of this conversation that you need to be aware of, and bring that up afterwards, hopefully with them practicing the listening technique with you. Now, to just conclude, I think maybe a lot of these things, they're a paradigm shift in the way that we do things. It's a completely different way of doing what we're doing. I think the way that Christadelphia is set up is for having that top-down information from the front. We have, evening lectures. Discussion is maybe not that prevalent throughout our community. Hopefully there's more and more of it. But often those discussions are so few and far between, we're often jumping to say what we really want to say and put our point across when it comes up. And I propose that actually we need more of an infrastructure change. We need to program a different sort of agenda for our Bible classes and for our evening lectures, and maybe even our Sunday services, to provide more balance and an ability to practice these things, because it comes through practice. I'm just going to ask Naomi if there's anything you want to chip in at the end with.
Not necessarily. I'd see if we want to discuss it.
Okay, I'll stop there. That's all the content I have. So yeah, open up for any discussion that might be.